a little bit about our founder story. Proof, perhaps, that an insect farm can be founded anywhere. Our founder story sounds a little bit like a bad joke. A NASA scientist, an NHL defenseman, and a medtech entrepreneur walk into a kitchen for tea. But that is indeed what happened. Greg Wanger, our CEO, had recently moved to Halifax. Alex Henry, operations, had just retired after 15 years of professional hockey, and my kitchen table and teapot were frequent spots for entrepreneurs here in Halifax, though this was the first time they'd been used for an insect farm. Within 6 months of that pot of tea, we had moved into our current pilot plant location, and my daughters became the proud owners of Quilliam, our African pygmy hedgehog and Oberland's first taste tester. All Oberlanders, and hopefully all of you, are passionate about the global protein crisis and want to do something to help close your local food loop. Black soldier fly larvae let us do that. Black soldier fly larvae are voracious eaters. They will rapidly consume any organic feedstock, and with prime feed, they can grow up to 8,000 times their size in 10 days. In Canada, our regulatory agency, CFIA, requires that feed for black soldier fly larvae be pre-consumer organics, not post-consumer or household green boxes or compost. But given the massive amount of food waste generated, there's still significant volume of food processing byproducts to feed our grubs. Beer mash or spent grains from breweries, potato sludge from our local potato chip producers, and of course, past due produce from out the back of our grocery stores. Black soldier fly larvae are a non-pest species, and if they escape the facility, they do not eat vegetation and they hold no threat to crops. Also, in our climate here in Nova Scotia, the flies do not survive outside our facility. And while the larvae are more resilient, they still can't make it through our winters. So why black soldier fly larvae? They may be easier to feed than most insects, but what other advantages do they have? Well, their life cycle lends itself well to automation. Think about a chicken farm. Ancient chicken farms, chickens were raised from chick to laying hen and broilers all in one barn. But modern chicken producers specialize. They have their chicks in a hatchery facility, hens in an egg production facility, and broilers are in a completely different spot. This same kind of life cycle segmentation can occur in black soldier fly. The pupae, for example, require a dark, dry environment, and they're quite tolerant of cool temperatures. The flies, they need high humidity and a well-lit, warm environment to mate and lay eggs. The eggs, they're fragile. They need a moist, warm environment and really need to be babied for their first few days of growth. The larvae, they want food, and more food. And of course, adequate moisture and moderately warm temperatures. Since each life cycle stage has a different environmental need, splitting your rearing facility into zones is logical. This is also why black soldier fly are much harder to rear at home than crickets or mealworms. So those home enthusiast insect rearers have a difficulty optimizing growth of BSFL when 3 separate zones are required for their full life cycle. Parsing out these different life cycle stages allows us to specialize and automate around specific stages in the growth cycle. This gives us a less hands-on approach than rearing crickets, for example. Another attribute to insect farming, and black soldier fly in specifics, is the potential for zero waste processing. Because not only are the insects themselves in both the adult and larval stage feed ingredient, so is their frass. And in black soldier fly facilities, the deceased flies and pupae shells are also a great source type, easily separated from the larvae because the life stages are separate in different zones. Each part of the black soldier fly rearing process becomes a product. If there's chaff left over from your rearing process, and there may be, depending on what you feed your grubs, it can be either treated and reused as bedding substrate again, or mixed with the frass and shells in a combination fertilizer product. Hopefully, you know the advantages of an insect frass as a specialty fertilizer or a biostimulant. If not, I'm happy to talk about it in the questions. This life cycle lends itself very well to a zero waste facility. So close the food loop and do it without further harm to your environment. As for the market, this is kind of an interesting thing about insect farming. Because the world needs alternate protein, the market pull for insect protein is immense. The world supply currently of insect protein equals about 10% of the requirement for protein here in Canada. And this is protein just for animals, fish, and chickens, not human use. And of course, Canada is only 1/10 the size of the US market. So this makes for a really interesting commercial sector, because rather than competing on the marketing side and attempting to get a percentage of a market, insect farms are far more challenged on the scale-up side. We compete for feedstock. We have to compete for spent grains with cattle feed producers, pre-consumer organics that are meant for upcycling, and even with facilities that divert organics to anaerobic digesters. Our scale-up and growth as insect farms is far more dependent on getting a stable, inexpensive feedstock rather than generating a demand in the marketplace for our products. But an additional challenge around black soldier fly farms is that we do have diverse feedstock inputs to feed our larvae. And we have multiple market streams to sell into. It would be very rare to see one distribution partnership and your business case is done. What's much more likely is having to do multiple partnerships to secure your feedstock and multiple distribution agreements to sell into all the channels available to insect protein. The live feeder market, which Oberland does sell into through our Worms brand, it's a tricky one. We've heard in earlier lunch and learn sessions that shipping live feeders is difficult. And of course, the limited shelf life of live feeders is also a challenge. Shipping across Canada in the winter, well, heat packs can only do so much. You'll see with many young insect farm operations like ours, we rely heavily on the pet treat markets to avoid the more challenging feed mill regulatory requirements of poultry and aquaculture feed. But each one of these channels requires separate labeling and distribution. So, for example, dog treats are positioned quite differently than aquarium fish treats, and lizard supplements are different than wild bird feed, and so on. This means for your operations, at least here at Oberland, we've had to generate two channels, a business to consumer channel and a business to business channel. Because Oberland sells live feeder larvae, we've created a completely separate brand, an e-commerce channel, and staff dedicated to packaging and distributing the live feeders under the brand of Worms. We do direct to consumer direct to wholesalers, and sell into pet stores with distribution agreements and bi-monthly restocking shipments. Obies has even invested in branded fridges to place in partner pet stores to help extend the shelf life of our live feeders and allow bi-weekly rather than weekly restocking. On the business-to-business side, that's really what handles our feedstock sources and the large-scale ingredient purchases. That's handled on the Oberland side. Frass, well, it spans both worlds. It's packaged and distributed by Oberland to garden centers and others, but it's also sold by Mealworms in the e-commerce channel as well. So even a young company like ours is already facing the challenge of these multiple distribution channels to sell our products. As if the distribution channels were not enough, we also face some pretty significant regulatory hurdles. In Nova Scotia, we were the first and so far only black soldier fly farm. This meant for regulatory agencies and regulators that we were completely outside their norm. In some scenarios, we had to be classified as a compost facility, even though we don't generate compost, just to be allowed to bring our feedstock in. And in Canada, feed mill regulations through CFIA are extremely stringent. We're very fortunate at Oberland that our process doesn't generate high BOD leachate, but we had to prove that many times over. In some jurisdictions, accepting spent grains as feedstock would simply be an internal QA certificate of conformity. In our jurisdiction, diverting pre-consumer organics required full authorization from a provincial body as a waste receiver. This landscape is changing, and hopefully for the better, but depending on where you're located and how novel insect farming is in your area, be prepared to explain again, and maybe explain again how your facility will operate safely. If you have any questions, I'm here and eager to listen in the Q&A session afterwards. Thanks very much.
Thank you so much, Barbara. And we're going to move to our next species, crickets, which is presented by Kevin Bachhuber of Bachhuber Consulting and formerly of Big Cricket Farms. So let's go to that.
Welcome to How to Farm Crickets, NACIA lunch and learn. We have a lot to go through, so I'm going to speed through these slides. There are also several hidden slides filled with different numbers that are hidden in this presentation. I'd recommend downloading the full PowerPoint for a deeper look. There are dozens of different techniques and styles for farming crickets, depending on who you are, where you are, what resources you have access to, etc. I'm going to cover some of the more common ones. First, who I am. I'm Kevin Bachhuber, managing member at Bachhuber Consulting. A little bit of my background. In 2014, I started Big Cricket Farms, LLC. In 2015, we became the first FDA-inspected human food-grade insect farm in the US. In 2016, we crashed it. Later in 2016, I started Bachhuber Consulting with the unofficial tagline of "We've made mistakes so you can make new and interesting ones." In 2019, I was elected to the NACIA board. In 2020, I became NACIA Board Emeritus. In 2021, I started Madison Cricket Farm, a functional live feeder farm designed to be used as a case study. Before we dive in deeply, while I still have your full attention, let's talk about safety. When working in the farm, it's important to shower before bed. Don't go to sleep covered in crickets. Wear gloves, hairnets, and masks during dust-filled activities like harvesting, transferring, and packing. And beware the cricket range. If you're in the farm and you start feeling shortness of breath, tunnel vision, and unaccountable anger, you need to get out and take a break. Regardless, mandatory breaks every 1.5 to 2 hours, sufficient hydration, and shortened workdays are all was fine. He was rushed to the hospital and was okay, but developed a permanent allergy to crickets and had to find a new industry. There are consequences to ignoring health and safety. With that out of the way, let's talk about the basics. There's a little bit of terminology I'll be using today. Pinhead is a baby cricket, often used to describe 0 to 10-day-old neonates. Bin is a container used to grow crickets. It's typically larger than a tote, which is a 20 to 50-gallon pre-made container. Transferring crickets is moving them from one cricket to another, while harvesting is removing crickets from the farm to sell. Frass is cricket poop, and live feeders refer to live insects packed and sold for sale at stores, etc. This is the basic cricket lifestyle. They do best at about 90 degrees Fahrenheit and 20 to 40% humidity, 90% or so for pinheads. They'll incubate for typically about a week before the pinheads hatch out. They'll need the higher humidity and heat until they firm up into teenagers. Like any other teenager, they become ravenous at this stage. Keep their feed filled or they'll turn on their friends. After their final juvenile instar, they become adults, start chirping and mating, and be ready to lay eggs in 3 to 5 days. We typically breed 3 times, but they're often. In terms of the scale of a farm, we see people go through several different stages of farm. Jumping between these phases may require entirely different techniques. What works small doesn't scale up smoothly to a large farm. Find what scale you want to settle into. It's okay to settle there. In terms of funding your farm, there are a ton of ways to farm your business. I've listed a few options here. Increasingly, cricket farming businesses are treated like any other enterprise, meaning your city, county, state, and federal and small business programs are an effective way to fund your growth. Moving on to facilities and equipment. For facility design and looking for a building, consider hiring a tenant representing a commercial real estate broker. Typically, the real estate in your areas can be a far more complex situation than you really want to get into. Common buildings that people use include warehouses, grocery stores, retail spaces, strip malls, pole barns, and chicken sheds. I advise you to not get more than you need, which is always kind of a moving calculation. But if you can start from your income, calculate your desired yield, and find a space to fit with room to grow, you should be in good shape. Think about the weather. Can you keep this place hot enough year round? And make sure that you have access to running water and relatively unpolluted air. About 60% of your farm is going to be for farming, 40% is going to be filled with everything else. HVAC is the single most critical aspect of the farm. I know I mentioned on the last slide, but I felt it was worth its own slide. It determines the success or failure of your farm. And spend here, if nowhere else. On the other side of the slide, I've listed a couple of other important siting factors. And just as a note, food-grade crickets have far stricter standards than we have. On this slide is a short list of the equipment that's used in the farming spaces. You'll need an extra equipment in the non-farming spaces, but this is enough to get started. There are different philosophies on boxes and bins, sizes of equipment, things like that. Some people prefer smaller, more easily accessible things like pre-made totes, both so that they can have more control over how many crickets they have per bin and can see the development more easily. Other people move all the way to the other extreme, whole room systems, which, while very labor efficient, present certain problems in estimating your population sizes. The one that I'll particularly highlight are IBCs. They are 275-gallon water tanks. They're fairly standard in many of the farms now. They're cut in half. The cage is used to make shelves. They're efficient, inexpensive, available everywhere, and require no extra parts. The video off to the right is from Shoebug's Cricket Farm and is an excellent summary on how to build bins and racks out of IBCs.
Welcome back to the blog.
Crickets need water. During their early days of life, they mostly inhale the water through spiracles, holes in their sides. All crickets at all ages, though, need to drink some water to enhance their survivability. There's key dangers to water when you live life at the scale of an insect, though. Pinheads in particular are likely to get sucked into any standing water droplets that you have, because at their scale, surface tension and viscosity become a major factor. I'm inherently negative when it comes to watering systems, so here are some common types and complaints about each. I just want to take 1 second to highlight that sponges need a reservoir. A couple of years ago, there was another business doing farming classes, and they advised just using sponges without any water tank attached to it. I can always tell clients who took that class because they write in reporting 88% mortality rates. A sponge without a reservoir will be wet for at max about an hour in 90 degrees Fahrenheit. Moving on to feed. In terms of feed when starting out, I recommend using Missouri. It's a pre-made feed that's supported by several PhDs. Creating your own feed over time is great, but when you're starting out, you have so many other variables. It's easier to keep this mission-critical factor stable. Moving into daily operations. This is a typical daily workflow at our farm. You get in the morning, check for hatches, transfer them to bins, replace waters and fill feeds for all crickets, set breeding trays for the breeders, harvest and package your crickets for sale, update your notes and records, clean, sweep, and get out of there. There are 2 slides after this one that we're skipping that have standard measures for the crickets by the 1,000, as well as cricket production per square foot. Getting into measuring, it's more typical to see people use volumetric measuring if they are selling live feeders, and people doing mass-based measuring if they're selling for food or other bulk sales. Size variation is a real factor the smaller crickets are in particular. I don't recommend using mass or measuring pinheads. I would suggest using a graduated setup instead. Moving into the business aspects of cricket farming. Sales are the most important part of your business. Don't undersell yourself. People who try to sell or try to undersell compared to their competitors starve themselves to profit and are typically liable in 6 months. It's really hard to feel like you can charge the rates that are market rate, especially initially, so fight that imposter syndrome. Go online, look at your peers and competitors, offer comparative rates, make sure that your quality is good before you're selling to larger and larger customers. And don't forget about the costs that go into packaging. I recommend my clients start with a few small customers to get themselves up to speed, then accumulate a few bigger contracts, then go back and fill in more with small customers. That means that you're not constantly behind the ball trying to grow an ever larger amount of crickets and can maximize your profitability. When you're at the point that you're ready for wholesaling, this is my recommended way of doing it. Figure out what your consumer price is, subtract all your box costs, etc. Apply a discount appropriate to the buyer's role in the supply chain. Add back in those box costs, etc. If necessary, and then arrive at a wholesale price. All these numbers are rough approximations, by the way, that I just pulled for a hypothetical. One of the more common questions we get is where to find customers. I advise you to start local, calling pet stores or restaurants, depending on whether you're growing feeders or food. The constant need for crickets and supplies have been short for the last few years, so it should be pretty easy. Doing personal deliveries are nice before you can afford a live shipping setup. And I would definitely recommend getting used to sites like eBay before you move on to more difficult and more customer service intensive platforms. In terms of your types of customers, there's a wide variety of psychographics and demographics. We're not really going to spend any time on this, but Claritas 360 is an excellent tool for finding who the people in your area are. My final thoughts: as you grow your farm, you'll find opportunities for advancement. I find that people typically go one of two ways. They'll choose an artisanal approach or move into automation. A quick aside, in the wheat industry, every year there's a competition between combine harvesters and an old guy with a scythe. Every year at the start of the competition, the combines take off and they're far, far ahead of the single dude with the scythe. But as they start getting pointed in the road, you see the guy seemingly slowly but steadily catching up to the machine. In most years, the artisan wheat harvester will win machines. Either one of these approaches is good. Either way, invest in surroundings that you want to look at. Artsy farms are better for now. Collaborate with people around you, and that will probably guide the development track that you take. As you start getting more advanced too, there are other techniques that you can start taking advantage of, like multi-point harvesting, bottleneck automation, production lines. These will all help grow your profitability over time. Finally, exits. You should always have an exit. Be ready to leave. Don't pull $50,000 out of your pension and make this your one final chance to have a big win. When you leave, if you leave the industry in good shape. Admit defeat, learn from it, get rid of your customers, equipment in ways that help them stay in the industry and leave you with a good impression. Try not to panic, you will anyways. Remember, you don't have to have the biggest farm, biggest, best, whatever. It's okay to just
Excellent, great. We have gotten through black soldier fly crickets, and our last presentation is going to cover mealworms. And following that presentation, we'll have all of the presenters live to answer any questions that haven't been covered yet in the Q&A. And as you have been, feel free to put those questions in.
Hello, this is Gabriel Biguria with Inprotin, Insect Protein Innovations, based in beautiful Guatemala. And we wanted to thank NACIA, the North American Coalition for Insect Agriculture, for this opportunity today. Today, we'll be talking about the basics for growing mealworms. But first, I wanted to recognize the really good job that NACIA, as well as many of its members, have done to promote the importance of the insect space, as well as its many benefits. So today we're going to focus more on talking about key considerations for growing them. And with me today, we'll also have the participation of one of our co-founders, Pamela Pennington, as well as our production manager, Manuel. We will start with some initial considerations. First, once you have decided what insect you're going to be focusing on, then it's very important to define your strategy. Here you'll have to determine key things such as what end market you're going to be serving, with what products or services, and also what resources do you anticipate you'll have available over time to do so. For an initial focus, are you going to be serving the needs of the animal market, the plant market, the human nutrition market, or improving the environment, for example? Each one of these has its own very unique set of requirements and considerations. Also, what products or services are you going to be developing? Are you going to focus on basic products? Are you going to be spending more resources and R&D to develop more higher value add products for the feed market, for the industrial market? Are you going to focus more on R&D projects or the education market, for example? Another important consideration is what's going to be your role in the food chain? What's your specialization? Are you going to be really good at the production side, R&D, distribution, product development, all of them, or just some of them? In our case at Inprotin in Guatemala, we have chosen initially to focus on the production side and really try to become really good at producing consistent. So right now, our focus is on production and R&D, trying to make sure that we control all of the variables on a small scale, with the idea of eventually being able to move on to an industrial scale production. Also, our focus initially will be on the feed market, and more specifically on the aquaculture feed market. This is a space where we have significant know-how and expertise of many years, and we understand really well the needs of the segment. So that's our initial focus. And also, we're very interested in serving also the needs of the human nutrition market. And but to do so, we need to make sure that we are very good at producing consistently on a scale basis, and also on our R&D processes. As for drivers and differentiation, we're one of the few companies in Guatemala involved in insect production, at least on a commercial scale. So it's very important for us to make sure that we get it right, and also that we set up the right partnerships. That way, we can have a real chance to develop a prosperous sector in our country and to help towards its development goals. Now, we'll talk about some key production factors to consider, beginning with the environment and conditions for your colony. Are you going to set up a closed system where you have full control of your internal and external factors? Are you going to set up a semi-closed system where you have some control, or an open system where you have little control? Also, very importantly, you need to understand the role that temperature and humidity play on the development and growth of your colony at its different stages. Also, another important factor is vector control. External influences such as plagues, diseases, and other factors that can affect the development and even survival of your colony. In our case, we've learned that plagues is not a matter if we're going to get them, but as to when you get them and how you deal with them. Also, very importantly, food, the nutrition of your colony. But there are different types of feeds to consider, and so you need to consider which ones you're going to use. Are you going to use the mixes? How often are you going to apply them? And also how you're going to manage your different population densities at different stages. All this will have an effect as to how your colony develops. And finally, infrastructure decisions. How much space are you going to be allocating to your colony? What type of racks, shelves, materials, food grade, non-food grade, and so forth. All these are important decisions. And finally, before I pass you on to my colleagues, I would like to leave you with a learning from our experience managing live animals in the aquaculture space. Over our experience of many years, we've learned that no matter how much you think you know, you really don't know it all. And whenever you start getting overconfident, when you feel that you really know a lot, nature has a funny way of reminding you that you don't, and bringing you back to your humble beginnings. So our approach is one that we definitely don't know it all in the insect space, and that we're always learning this wonderful space. Thank you.
We are developing an insect breeding program that will focus on strain selection for productivity, for nutritional content, and pathogen resistance. The first step in this breeding program is to identify genetic markers that can be used to characterize individuals in a colony. The first image on the left is an electrophoresis gel where we are characterizing individual specimens from 2 different colonies using one genetic marker. With this marker, you can see that each individual has a different genetic fingerprint. This allows us to differentiate between individuals and to characterize each colony to see how much genetic variability there is. You can see here that in the left of the red line, we have several individuals that have different profiles. On the right, we have individuals that are similar in profile. And these come from one colony where it is apparent that there is a lower genetic variability in the colony. There's more apparent inbreeding. And on the left, we see that there's more genetic variability that we could use eventually to select for novel traits. On the right, you can see a similar image from a different gel where we have the same individuals in the same order as in the first gel, but it's a second genetic marker that we're using to characterize the strains. And our objective is to develop a panel of different markers that can be used to genotype individuals from different colonies and start creating a selection system so that we can improve our productivity by, for example, increasing fertility by selecting for genotypes that are associated with higher fertility, and also, for example, increased vitamin content. And with these combinations of genotypes and phenotypes, we would expect to have an increase in our colony productivity and also eventually an improved product with added value.
Hello, today we'll be talking to you about several aspects that we consider when we do our production procedures. And the first one is the importance of modeling. Why do we model? We model because we want to be able to project growth. And by projecting growth, we can anticipate space, production, and food requirements. So that's why this is really important. Also, it's important to know what is a good model. And we need to understand that a complex model is not always a better model. What we need is a model that can generate realistic scenarios to drive realistic actions. So if a simple model can achieve this, that's all we need. And what data goes inside a model? Well, the data that goes inside a model are basically the initial populations of the insect we are working with, and also key quality control parameters. First, we can obtain them from scientific articles or journals or studies done by other breeders. But the most important thing is to start gathering this data ourselves. That way our models can be more accurate. Some of these data may be pupa survival rates, hatching rates, amount of eggs laid by each adult, and many more. And it's also important to avoid jigo. This is something really known in data science. Basically, it means that if we put garbage inside a model, garbage will come out. So it's important to be aware of this. Now, good practices for healthy production growth. It's really important that all practices should be replicable from the beginning, because as we scale up, we're gonna need to do each practice every time more often and more times, a bigger amount of times. So it's really important to do it good since the beginning. And the other thing is that hygiene is not negotiable. we work really, we're really tough on hygiene procedures, because we know that these hygiene procedures are the ones that will help us have a healthy production, since we scaled up, and will help us avoid pests and vectors and many more other things. And it's also important to adapt quickly while we're growing. We cannot only grow and not do adaptation, because our system will not be as resilient. So it's really important for us to be able to see what's going on, see the big picture, and adapt as quickly as we can as we are growing. And some of the aspects of the weekly maintenance that we do are, well, first make note that all the stages of the life cycle are separated weekly. Make sure that the eggs are separated, that the adults are where they are supposed to be, that the larvae are doing what they're supposed to be on the stage they're at, and basically just monitor frequently all life cycles. And also provide dry and wet food weekly. We make sure that all the food supplied is recorded. That way we can have data, and at the end of our production, we can know what amount of food was converted and what amount of protein. This is something really important for any insect production. And also, we like to do small experiments. We are always doing them, and this helps us improve our processes. And we choose small experiments because we like to experiment with the whole production, but these small experiments give us really important insights on what we're doing good, what we are not doing so good. That way we can improve along the way and make sure our production is always getting better and better. So thank you very much for your time and for the opportunity. Here's a picture of our production facility and the rest of the team. And thank you for letting us share a little bit of what we do in Inprotin.
Excellent, great. So we have entered into our Q&A. I want to introduce myself. I'm Wendy Lou McGill, and I'm the Communications and Membership Director for NACIA, which, as you all, I hope, know, is the North American Coalition for Insect Agriculture. And I encourage everyone to go to our website at nacia.org to learn more about what we're up to and membership. And I'd like to welcome our panelists and go ahead and get started with whatever Q&A we have left. I appreciate that you guys have been answering things along the way. I wonder if we could go around. We have a couple of questions that might be good for all three groups. One is looking at, one question, as you may see coming in from Ian, is looking at parasitic species. He mentioned wasps in particular. Have you had to deal with parasitic species?
Hi, Wendy. Here at Oberland in Nova Scotia, black soldier fly aren't a native species. So there's perhaps far less invaders here in our natural environment, but we have indeed seen parasitic wasps that can transfer over. They would natively here attack houseflies, but because black soldier fly have a pupae form that is very similar in duration to houseflies, they are vulnerable to that. So biocontainment and biosecurity is absolutely required, even in an environment like ours where black soldier fly aren't native.
Yeah, I would like to say that at least on the mealworms we are breeding, we haven't had any type of parasitic wasp, but I have seen parasitic wasp attack other types of insects. So it's always something to be careful about, and usually biocontainment is the way to go, as Barbara said.
I feel like we more usually run into parasites and pest species kind of in the breeding substrate. It's possible to get a number of different types of mites that'll infect the eggs or the babies. That's usually just kind of like a sterilization situation. A big issue in a lot of farms is domestic beetles, which grow at like nearly the same timeline as crickets do. And they eat significantly faster than the crickets. They don't really like attack them unless there's a high density. And there's kind of varied techniques for handling them, mostly involving disrupting them as they pupate.
Excellent, thank you all. I want to move on to our next question, which is looking at allergy risks. And I guess with the caveat that we could spend a great deal of time on this, I'm going to go ahead and focus the question a little bit on insect rearing and talk about risks that you see on the farm for the farmers that are working directly with the insects. I know, Kevin, you covered this in the beginning of your presentation. It'd be great if we could have another roundtable to go through, just looking at ways to mitigate and anything that you've learned in your practice from that.
Yeah, I guess I can go first. I mean, the real allergenization risks kind of come from constant inhalation. So like I said, just like if you can build shower out facilities into your farms, that's kind of my standard best practice, where you have locker rooms for street clothes, shower, and then you know, clothes for the in build. You know, the other real thing that we do a lot of is kind of looking at Osha Conformance. I feel like I run into a lot more problems with kind of people snagging themselves on like a screw end or a jagged piece of metal than kind of the insect-based health risks, at least to date. But I know some of the other bugs can be a little bit more prone to sensitization.
Yes, when it comes to mealworms, this may be a big issue because we are dealing with bran, and whenever we have to sift the frass, it can get really dusty. So one of the things that we do when it comes to our production is wear protective goggles, so it will not get in your eyes and cause allergy. And we also have like a breathing thing. It has a dust filter, so it won't affect when you're breathing. And usually we only use it when we are sifting or doing the part of the operations that will really bring all the dust up. It's not necessary at all times, but yeah, the more you have, the bigger the facility, the bigger the problem may be.
So I'd echo Kevin's comments about shower out for sure. It's just practical. We also use appropriate PPE when it's a dusty situation around harvesting for sure. And of course, really good HRV and HVAC for dust and odor as well. So I think it's just, you want to make your facility safe and pleasant to work in. So I actually have an anaphylactic allergy to shellfish and do react to crickets. So I won't be visiting Kevin anytime soon. But I haven't reacted at all to the black soldier fly, larvae or flies. I've been fortunate that way for sure.
Great. I'm going to move on to another question that is looking at dealing with pests in the farm. So the insects that come that you're not rearing. The question specifically was looking at like fruit flies, as well as the fungi that can happen when, you know, our moisture levels are receptive to them. So it'd be great, again, if we could go through and just any kind of tips that you have for dealing with pests. We also had another comment from Lou Sorkin about the domestic beetles, which I know can pop up in some of our operations. So Manny, did you want to start? And then we could go to Barbara and then Kevin.
Yeah, sure. Well, right now that we are doing production more formally, we have had few issues with pests. We have had a little trouble with waxworms, and and we have been able to contain them really quickly by making sure that each component is isolated, and by sterilizing all the food that goes inside our facility. That has worked for us. But I can tell you that if you don't pay attention for a couple of days, you can have problems with mites. We've seen spiders, flies, and anything that you can imagine will pop up if you're not paying attention to the control of the environment.
So I think that's kind of funny because our front door, the spiders just come. It's obvious that indoors there's something that's drawing them in. Absolutely, with biocontainment and biosecurity, I think the biggest challenge is if you find an invader whose life cycle mimics too closely the insect you're growing. So, for example, fruit flies need a certain amount of time to lay their eggs and hatch. If you can disrupt that, and back to my presentation when I talked about zoning, if each one of your zones is contained and has really good biosecurity about it, then invaders might get in, but they can't thrive because they can't complete their whole life cycle in the environment that they've invaded. So I'd say it's really about biocontainment and biosecurity more than anything. And for sure, the sterilization and cleanliness of what you bring in. So if you're bringing in sawdust, if you're bringing in bran, if you're bringing in any of those bedding materials or food sources, making sure they're clean and sterile before they go into your zone. We have definitely seen invaders at Oberland, including the parasitic wasps, but it's all about biocontainment.
Yeah, I mean, in the course of consulting over the last half decade, I think I've seen everything, kind of, from the smallest mites and cordyceps, fungal infections. I think the record held for the largest invader was somebody came into the farm one day to find an ostrich in it that had escaped a nearby wildlife sanctuary. That one, definitely call animal control. Same with raccoons. People who have larger, older farms will, are kind of taking over older buildings. If you have kind of like a 10 to 14 building setup, you'll typically end up fumigating, like tenting and fumigating 1 or 2 buildings a year. And kind of doing that on like a 5-year rotation seems to be effective for most people. It's good to make friends with your local branch of a large scale extermination company early. Most of the entomologists that work on staff there secretly want to be, raising bugs, not killing bugs. So they'd be very interested in your project. We use a lot of like sticky traps for non-flying things, and a lot of diatomaceous earth on the bottoms of our racks, everything 6 inches off the floor to kind of minimize animal contact. The flying stuff is always a lot more challenging. You can use like the fly zappers and stuff, but they tend to be real species specific in how they attract or what they attract. And then ants are kind of the other real common invaders that we see that are a lot smarter than us in aggregate. So that one's just kind of a you fight it as you can kind of situation.
And maybe I can add.
Please go ahead, Pamela.
The problems with rodents. That's another big issue. So I think you have to have a very good rodent control program.
Absolutely. Yeah. Glue traps are kind of the name of the game, but when you do like a periodic fumigation, that will typically wipe out like rat nests and things like that. But they can explode out of control in a couple of months. They reproduce pretty quickly.
Well, keeping an eye on time, I wanted to do a super quick last question, which is, I'm going to make it a yes or no, so we can let everyone get on to their day. And we had a question come in about whether any of you are doing life cycle analysis for your farm, or in the case of Kevin, you participated in one. So looking at, the full spectrum of greenhouse gas emissions that are coming in your entire supply chain. So a scope 3 assessment in effect. So whoever would like to start first is.
I'll say Absolutely, yes. And ours is going to be published on our website within a month or two. So absolutely core to our operations. It matters to us. A pilot plant, it's not ideal yet. With our expansion, it'll be even better.
Yeah, I'm participating in one with UW-Madison. We're doing it as a 3-year thing to kind of see the difference in the LCAs between a small, medium, and large farm. I've participated in them in the past, but water is always the hardest one.
Kevin, is that focused on crickets or other species?
Just what I have lying around, so crickets.
For us, we have it on our to-do list of many things to do. We do recognize the importance of it as one of the areas we definitely want to focus, but we're focusing right now on optimizing production fully and trying to make sure that we can scale it efficiently and keeping them alive, of course. So we'll get there.
Excellent. Well, we'll look forward to learning from all of your LCAs and your experience over time. I want to thank all of our panelists so deeply for your amazing presentations and sharing all of your knowledge. And thanks everyone who registered and showed up. Again, we'll be sharing the webinar recording with everyone. And I also wanted to let you know that we are adding a lunch and learn on June 23rd. That's going to be focused on insect automation. And we're doing this with NACIA member Viscon Group, which is based in the Netherlands. And then they also have a presence in Canada. I'll be sharing information about that. That lunch and learn will be available just for NACIA members. And we'll share information about what will be covered in it with everyone widely. So thank you again so much and have a great rest of your day.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank
Cheers
you.
from Guatemala.